Hey folks, it is March the 29th, and we are going to start our first unit on kind of like the world history portion of the class. I posted the notes for you to follow along in the Google Classroom. And so this is kind of picking up where we left off in our book. So if you remember our book, we left off, we were talking about in France, we had like the high point of absolute monarchy, like divine right kingship. And so this is building up, the book did a good job building up the political point to revolution. So people are getting fed up with these kings having all of this God power and all this other stuff where they think that they're like walking divinities. And the people are like, well, what about us? But what we're also going to talk about is that the economic situation tied with that. Because if there's one thing I read with my seniors, it's from a guy named Hayek. And he pointed out that your economic freedom is tied completely with your personal freedom, your personal liberty. If you don't have the right to decide where your labor, your work, your money goes, it's hard to have those other rights you really want. And we're going to see that's going to develop in this period. Industrialization, imperialism. So we give it generally the date of 1750. That's kind of a generic starting point. But the end point's 1914. Anybody know what happens in 1914? Yeah, First World War. Yeah. So that's the thing. Especially for Europe and the West, they're going to see industry as like this limitless human potential. Whether you are somebody who is free market oriented, or even if you were like a hardcore socialist like Karl Marx, you thought that the ability to build things in industry was limitless human potential. But the First World War is going to shake that up. It's going to show that industrialization can lead to essentially manufactured murder, like the type of warfare that leads to body counts that have never even been dreamed of. So it's going to be a real wake-up call for a lot of people throughout the world. And during this part too, you see I also have imperialism. This is when Europe is going to start really going out and grabbing parts of the world and snatching it up for themselves, especially Great Britain. You're going to have this also done by France, even a little bit from Italy. And the new kids on the block, Germany, are going to start doing this as well. We're going to see the formation of Germany, which is kind of going to be like the starting point for the First World War. Well, they wanted their own country, but nobody planned on it. They're like, hey, wait. Everything was cool till y'all existed. So.
Wait, you go back into the year.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know why I think that. I think that's the first mass-produced typewriter. So yeah, you see, it's like imagine doing that. Like whenever I think about that, I think of those pictures of like ladies in like the 30s and 40s with long press-on nails, and they're somehow doing that. All right, so vocabulary. If you know what these words mean, why would you write them down? But if you don't know what it means, maybe shorthand it. Don't write down the whole definition. Like if you like go to college and you're writing down everything, you're doing it wrong. Don't do that. Just get hand cramps and you'll forget it. All right, so vocabulary, industrialization involves the building, operating factories and businesses in a region, country, etc. So why this is important is because it's not entirely new. Yeah, there had been factories even in the days of ancient Rome. They had some factories. Even like in Athens, they had pottery factories. But here we're going to see it take on a big scale. Businesses too. Enclosure. This is what's going to totally destroy the old style of farming that the peasantry in Europe had enjoyed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And now all of a sudden, they're going to have to get jobs and pay attention to like time of the day and money and stuff like that, which is completely not how their ancestors had lived. So here we have land being fenced off from common usage. So no longer can peasants enjoy somebody else's land, ending the old estate serf style economies. So we're going to see where you're going to have lords of estates. Those estates we talked about in the Middle Ages, and afterwards, they're going to evict all the peasants and replace them with things like cattle and sheep and stuff like that. And that's going to make the peasants have to go to the city and look for work or get put on a boat and put to places like America. The factory system, the shift of production to cities and factories as opposed to homes and the put out systems. It used to be, and you might remember this from your other classes, where things like cloth were made at home. Like the mother of the home would spin and weave cloth, and the daughters would learn how to do so. And a lot of the things that were manufactured were made by hand by like a smith or somebody who knew a trade like basket weaving and did it in their time when they weren't farming. Factory systems, that's all they're going to do. They're going to do it well. They're going to do it cheaply. It's going to be uniformly. And people who make things by hand are going to quit because they can't compete. Free enterprise, private businesses that operate for a profit in a competitive system with minimal government interference. This is going to be something that's really going to take off in the late 1700s. The idea that if you just let an economy grow, it's just going to grow. And that's true. But then we're going to see a lot of governments push back against that because some companies and businesses might grow in a way that are harmful to people or destructive in other ways. And you're like, well, maybe we should do a couple things to stop that. Maybe we shouldn't put poison in people's medicine.
Or corn.
And like next year, I start out like this too. I always have like some vocabulary at the beginning of a unit. So, just terms that kind of guide us through things. But we're going to keep it like just no longer than 30 minutes. There's a lot of studies that show that even for adults, once you talk past 20 minutes, people tune you out unless somebody's got like abnormal attention span. So it's not that you don't care. It's not that you're a bad person. It's you're kind of just wired that way. Not again. Okay.
What was we talking about again?
I don't remember these paintings. I remember I picked paintings from like the periods, but I don't like remember who the painters were and stuff. But yeah, I mean, like you look at this picture and like this is a big change from like old timey cities. Like you see, they built like there's public. It takes like public money to do things like put up lamps. People have lighting in their homes so they can actually do things like read at night instead of just go straight to bed as soon as the sun goes down. Like this looks like a woman out by herself walking safely. That's something that couldn't happen in a lot of cities through a lot of history because there was like a bunch of bad ruffians out there. There's a reason why in a lot of societies women had to be accompanied by like a male relative. It wasn't just because they were trying to be controlling. It was also because there were no police and there's a lot of bad guys out there. Homes with smokestacks. So like these are a lot of things that are put together and they don't happen overnight. Clean drinking water, sewage, schools, roads that are safe and they're not like full of like mud and dead animals and stuff. All right, here's a few more terms. So we talked about free enterprise. People often call that capitalism, but on the opposite side, they call it socialism. During this time period, you're going to have people who are going to say free enterprise may have made a lot of factories and stuff, but they felt like it came with some things that they called unjust. So the socialism is one of those things that actually been played around with for a long time before this period, but it's really going to take off here. Some or most industries are operated by the state to provide for the state instead of profit. So that's where the government says we need this, so we're going to use the factory to do this instead of the factory owner, right? So profit is for the owner. Below that, we have something communism. Communism has aspects of socialism economically, but it goes even beyond that. The production of goods and services is controlled entirely by the state. This control is also applied to education, religion, and social issues. So usually communist countries might do things like ban religions or control them so much where you can't do them. Education is also, it's something you might have the family completely taken out of and controlled, where you're educated to serve the state. And social issues, we're talking about like the government controls everything from like marriage to how many kids you have, if you can have a kid, where you live, what job you'll have, things like that. So very totalitarian. Imperialism, political, economic, and cultural domination imposed on a society by another society. So this is like, let's say you're a big country like England, you're powerful, you have a lot of money and a strong military, and you rule another country like India, where you pick their government, you pick their laws, and the things that make them the most money, you keep for yourself. So control their society, culture, and their economy. We have a lot of that going on during this time period. A lot of countries see the only way to wealth is essentially by controlling and taking from someone else. Well, not the only way, but a big part of it. Yeah, India, a lot of Africa, a lot of Asia and South America are going to be really hit hard by this. Remember, don't write down the whole definitions. Yeah, like some of these you can just probably get down with one word, right? Socialism, I'm going to do that one short. I'd be like, government controls business, you know. Communism is kind of complicated because there's so many, the thing is, what makes these complicated, if you get into it, you can like get to different kinds of imperialism, different kinds of communism, different kinds of socialism, different kinds of free enterprise, I guess. I don't know, getting like mixed on. But see, like, we're just worried about these definitions. All right, moving on. Why is it doing it twice? All right, so I think this is like a coal mine outside of the city. And coal is going to be one of those things, like your book kind of mentioned how like in England they moved from charcoal to coal. Coal is going to become a big, important mover for the factories and things like that. Hey, Kelly, can you turn around? That's kind of distracting me. For industry, because a lot of industry has to do with automation. You have to make machines to do things that people aren't quite powerful enough to do. But to get this coal, they're going to employ a lot of children to have to go in these narrow tunnels, digging on all fours for like 10 hours a day, not seeing sunlight, dragging these little coal carts behind them. It's going to be a sign of success, but it's also going to be a sign of what can really be wrong with human greed to where you can treat people like that. And what's sad is this kind of mining is still done today in places like the Congo for things we call rare earth minerals that are used to make your cell phones and stuff like that, and smart cars and high-tech devices. So there are still places in the world that that form of labor is forced on children. So the Industrial Revolution started in England and lasted. Now you could say like, yeah, it started in other parts of the world at the same time too. But really, it's like England is where it really takes off in the mid 18th to 19th centuries. So that's 1700s, right? You can make the case it kind of started a little before that, but really, it's in the 18th century when you're going to have a lot of textile mills. They're going to say that England is going to clothe the world, and before this time, cloth was expensive. You had to do it by hand on these looms. It took like all day of somebody's life just to make these things. Bless you. back in like the ancient days and stuff like that, you know that like Easter's coming up. And so like some of you might hear, if you go to church, you might hear that they were like, when Jesus was crucified, they divided his garments. And why? It's because cloth was expensive. It had to be made by hand, labor intensive. So clothing was worth a lot. Used clothing was worth a lot. So used clothing stores were like big business back in the day. They weren't like the Goodwill. So
You can pick up a t-shirt and jeans for $10.
it's crazy how like nowadays cloth it's kind of cheap now, but back then it was like super expensive. So built upon the old cottage industries used to create the English put-out system, where people would create products in their home for a business owner to sell. So it'd be like this, put-out systems like this. I'm a business owner and I sell baskets, right? So what I do is I sell baskets in London. But how I got to get the baskets is I take my little horse and my my wagon, and I go out to the little towns, the little villages, and I pay the people in the villages to make me the baskets. Then I bring them back to London to sell. That's how the old put-out system was. People made it by hand, but then they sold it to a merchant to sell for more money. So factories are going to replace that. England soon realized that it could make more wealth from selling exports to other European powers and colonies, while other countries simply sought gold and silver from their colonies. So if you remember, we talked about the age of exploration. Spain and Portugal went to the New World, and they found all this gold and silver that, you know, they kind of borrowed from the Aztecs and the Incas and stuff like that, right? Well, they had all this money, and they didn't have anything to buy with it until England came along. Like, hey, we made all these nice things. Give us your gold and silver, and we'll give you the nice things. Nice things made in factories, like clothing, and of course, tools and things like that. Made of. They're also going to revolutionize metalworking. So what you're going to see is you're going to have countries like Spain and Portugal, instead of making their own materials, they're going to essentially trade all of that gold and silver with England. And England is going to improve its personal economy, its industries. They're going to have factories that can do anything, and they'll have all the gold and silver. So they're going to become the world's superpower because of this. Like, so all the money goes there, and they get good at making stuff. It's kind of like, I guess, China today. I don't know. They're kind of doing that, aren't they? Aren't they making everything? Doesn't everybody buy from them? I mean, like everybody. So, and so the owners.
I mean, there's some things that you buy from other countries, like a lot of times you can find TVs made in other countries, but
And stuff that, and of course, a lot of cars are at least assembled here. A few more of these. There you go. So yeah, like, so you see, like, because of this, though, yeah, we're going to talk about some unjust things they're going to happen. We're also going to talk about people's lives will improve from this, and we're still kind of reaping some of those benefits today. Without industrialization, like, you wouldn't have this, right? Like you'd probably still be back under like a stick hut or something like that, rubbing sticks together to make a fire or something, which could work, I guess. I never got it to work. I don't know. I tried when I was a kid, and I could never make a fire like that. Always gave up and got matches. All right. Yeah. Oh. All right. So, yeah, another thing you see here. See, this is a steel mill here, and so steel is something that not all cultures were able to make. Like, there's some parts of Africa that could make steel. There were some parts of Asia and Europe, but it was really expensive and hard to do. You have to make iron very hot so that little carbon particles can infuse inside of that iron to make an alloy. And of course, steel is stronger in many ways. It's a little more flexible, so it's not so brittle. Well, they're going to come up with new processes to make steel faster and stronger and more efficient. And because they can make it stronger, they can do things like it can make better tools, and they can even make better weapons, cannons that can withstand powerful explosions to send big projectiles. But and they're going to be able to mass produce these things to sell for a profit. So that's going to be another one of those things that's going to revolutionize how things are. Continued. Gradually, landowners began to realize that they can make more money on wool used in textile industries than grain. So in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, gold and silver was really worth a lot because they didn't have a lot of it in Europe. But when Spain and Portugal bring all of this American gold and silver, now there's enough to actually use as money. And so because that's able to be used for money, there's less and less need of trading things in kind. And so like in the days of feudalism, the Lord would have the peasants grow some wheat, and the peasants would pay their taxes in wheat. Now the local lord's like, wheat's fine, but I can buy anything with money. How can I get money? By selling wool. And so this is going to lead to the enclosure system we'll talk about in a minute. New machines lessen the need for manpower. So as we have new inventions, first off with wind and water power through water mills and windmills, but then steam. Enclosure laws were passed to deny peasants access to lands they used for hundreds of years. So you might remember at the beginning of the year, when we were talking about the Middle Ages, we would look at a map and be like, oh, here's the Lord's Manor, and here's the little villages, and here's the church, and here's the cemetery, and then you would have the fields. And here's the field where this peasant works and this peasant, but then you had the common lands. First, they're going to close the common lands. They'll be like, you can't use this. So now the peasants can't even have animals. And the Lord will put his sheep there. And then using certain laws, they're going to evict the peasants and use their land where they used to live and farm for sheep. And sheep are easy. They don't need a lot of people to maintain them. But the wool that they could shear off of them would sell for a lot more money than the grain was worth. England's peasantry was forced out of the country and into the cities. Eventually, this gave factories the workforce they needed, but devastated the rights and traditions of the poor. And so, like writers of this period will talk about, like peasants who were used to having their whole village was like a giant family, right? And they had their own personal traditions and holidays. Those are gone. Now they're living in the city and they're separated. Instead of living by the season, like farmers used to do, now they had to live by the clock. You had to be at the work at this time. You got to break at this time, so on and so forth. And back then, they had to work like 10, 12-hour days. Like 10-hour day was pretty low. More like 12 to 16-hour days, 6 days a week, in dirty cities filled with smoke. And so it's going to lead to a lot of depression and things like that for a lot of these people. And it's going to make a saying that no longer do men eat sheep, sheep eat men, because essentially they're going to blame this new wool industry. For England, it's going to be great on the whole because that wool is going to be turned into cloth that they're going to sell through the whole world and get all this money I was talking about. But for the peasants, it's going to stink. Yeah. That's one of those things about whenever industry changes. Some people are hurt, and eventually things turn out right. Maybe not in your lifetime, but eventually. So, all right, we're going to do one more. We're going to call it Good Kids. And there's some majestic sheep.
Majestic.
Pretty woolly. Personally, I can't stand wool.
Echo.
All right, last one for the day. The Industrial Revolution continued. During this period, that's a typo, there was a massive shift in the population from rural to urban ones. And yeah, this is going to happen in America later on. It's not going to be as traumatic, though. It's going to be more willing. The development of steam power and machinery, such as the spinning jenny and mechanical looms, made England the clothing developer of the world. And these were closely kept secrets. This inspired other mechanized industries as well. So people are like, wow, steam power and machines can make you super rich off of clothing. Can it make you super rich off other things? Well, the answer is yes. Coal mining was highly in demand while forests were depleted, roads were created, and canals were developed to aid trade. So before this time period, lords and the crown owned most of the land. And not only did they own most of the land, most of that land was actually left to the forest. They had harsh laws against hunting and things like that. Peasantry weren't allowed to have things like hunting implements like bows and arrows and later on guns and things like that. Peasants weren't allowed to go hunting or trapping or anything like that. If they got caught, they got hung on the spot. That's what it, so they had very strict laws. But when kings and lords see how much money you can make off of it, they start selling these forests so they can have the wood sold. And then they could raise sheep on them. So England was kind of lucky. They were blessed with a lot of coal, so that helped a lot with the Industrial Revolution. But yeah, so this is where we're going to see it. It's going to start becoming more and more modern. And a lot of this stuff is happening during that period after we were talking about the Glorious Revolution and all that stuff. This is during a time, too, when America is starting to really be colonized in the 13 colonies. So all of this stuff is happening at the same time. It's like the whole world's changing rapidly from ways that it had stagnated in for just hundreds of years. So big changes. Now, give you a minute for that. Now, hey folks, if you're at home online, I went ahead and listed our first study island. If you need me to send you your password and your username, just send me an email and I'll send it to you. I don't want to post it here in front of the rest of the class. So, all right, see you later.
See you later, alligator.
Ooh, I think I've heard that